Okay, I just want to thank everybody for being here today. I'm going to be talking about the cost of cancer care and cancer survivorship. I think it's a topic that oftentimes gets overlooked, but has become an increasingly important topic in cancer survivorship. And I want to share a few things with you guys today about that. First, before I get going, I just want to thank everybody all the cancer survivors who are in attendance today, everybody with all their different colored ribbons and everything. It's such a beautiful rainbow you all make. And I love this quote, "The greater your storm, the brighter your rainbow." And you guys have all weathered one of the heaviest storms. So congratulations on being here today. And thank you for joining us with our survivorship conference. I think that's a great step into a healthy future. The objectives of my talk today are to, one, define financial toxicity in cancer care. It's a relatively new term, and it was coined back in 2010. And so I want to make sure we're all on the same page when I use that term in the talk today. So we'll define that for all of us. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the contributors to financial toxicity that continue to rise, are becoming a continued problem for not just cancer patients, but cancer survivors. And we'll discuss maybe some management strategies of financial toxicity. A lot of what we do is probably from a systematic level, systems level, but there are some things that the individual can do as well to protect themselves. The research that I'll be talking about in the talk today comes from health services research. I don't think it is as talked about as things like phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials where you're bringing drugs to market. And so I wanted to briefly talk about what health services research is, just in case people at home are unaware. Health services research examines how people get access to healthcare, how much healthcare costs, and what happens to patients as a result of this care. The main things that it identifies are effective ways to organize and manage health services, how to deal with the significant finances and costs of healthcare, how to deliver high quality healthcare or value care, and how to reduce medical errors and improve patient safety. This is a pretty important area of research, and we're finding that if we can maximize the efficiency of our system and improve the cancer care delivery we can give to patients, that a lot of times we can actually increase survivability longer than some of our new drugs coming to market. So it is a substantial area of research. And I would recommend, if any of you out there are ever asked to participate in surveys or some of these things, we really appreciate that, because this is the way that we improve our healthcare system and save lives. So let's define financial toxicity. So this is a new term coined in 2010, and we started to see it show up in the literature. And what it is basically adverse impacts of out-of-pocket healthcare. So money the individual, the patient is spending out of pocket in the form of treatment-related toxicity. So it's looking at it as, because you have to get this kind of treatment, you have to get this cancer treatment. This is just another toxicity, the out-of-pocket costs that you're having to pay that can affect mental health, that can affect your well-being, that can affect your ability to purchase healthy foods, and can contribute to all aspects of your life. So it's looked at now as another toxicity to cancer therapy, just like neuropathy, just like cardiomyopathy, right? So just like nerve damage, just like strain on the heart, just like nausea and vomiting. So just like those things are toxicities of cancer care, we're starting to see these same toxicities in terms of out-of-pocket costs for patients. Life after cancer is a rainbow of emotions, right? I think you all know that. I think one of the main ones, though, is in non-elderly adults and in difficulty in paying for medical bills. This was a study done in 2012 by the Kaiser Family Foundation, and they asked patients 3 questions. One was, did you have problems in the last 12 months in paying bills? And 1 out of 5 individuals with cancer had a problem with paying bills in the last 12 months. They asked them, did you have difficulty paying off medical bills over time? And about 1 in 4, so 26%, had difficulty paying off medical bills over a period of time, over any period of time. And then the last one was, are you unable to pay at all? Are the bills so astronomical you'll never be able to pay off these bills? And about 11% of individuals said that. So in the end, they said, did you answer yes to any one of these questions? And a third of patients did. So a third of patients are having difficulty, some sort of difficulty, whether it's paying off bills in a year, paying off bills over time, or unable to pay at all, with managing this medical debt. And that's pretty astronomical. So how do patients then buffer the financial strain of cancer care? We had another study that was done in 2015 that showed 42% of participants reporting a significant financial burden. And the way that they dealt with that was about 1 in 5, or 19%, partially filled a prescription instead of filling the prescription fully. Another 20%, or 1 in 5, took less than the prescribed amount of medicine, which means that they weren't taking the full dose of what their doctors had recommended for them. And I can't stress how damaging that can be to efficient care, effective care. A quarter of them just didn't fill the prescription at all. So 1 in 4, okay. And about half of them, 46%, use their savings to help cover costs, out-of-pocket expenses. Another half of them, 46%, reduced their spending on food and clothing, and about 68% had to cut back on leisure activities. So about 2/3 of individuals had to cut back on things they enjoy. And I know most people will say, well, yes, I mean, you have to sacrifice some things, but you have just been diagnosed with cancer, or you're getting cancer treatment or following cancer treatment. Your mental health is super important. This is a time in your life when you need things that provide hope and encouragement for you. So cutting back on those things that provide joy can be a major strain to effective therapies. But one of the main issues that it all comes down to is bankruptcy. And we found that the #1 cause of bankruptcy in the United States was medical bills. About 62.1% of all bankruptcies are contributed to medical bills. So these are individuals who have gotten sick, who have had to pay for medical care, and are now having to file bankruptcy because the cost of their medical care is too much for them. When we looked at those individuals, so who are these? I think a lot of people were surprised to find that the vast majority of those individuals that were filing for bankruptcy were not the uninsured, but were the insured individuals, maybe underinsured, but still insured individuals. These are the well-educated, these are the homeowners, these are the middle-class occupations, and these are the people with insurance. 3 out of every 4 individuals that filed for medical bankruptcy were insured and were middle-class, homeowners, et cetera. So these are, the bread and butter of the United of America that are filing for bankruptcy because of medical bills. This was the keynote paper. It came out in 2013, and it really kind of highlighted the issue for medical costs for cancer patients. It was specific to cancer patients, and it compared cancer patients across the spectrum. It compared them to specific matched controls. So patients who didn't have cancer, but were similar in terms of age, sex, zip code, and residence. So similar across multiple other issues, but just did not have cancer. And they found that there was a 250% increase in bankruptcy for cancer patients over matched patients with cancer. So just by having cancer, you have a 2.5 times greater chance of filing for bankruptcy than by not having cancer. And that was the only difference in those patients. So there is something about the cost of care that strains the community, that strains the individual, and has an increase in causing bankruptcy for the patient. And this study came out in 2013, and this is where we were trying to start to say, okay, we are missing something big and we're causing harm to our patients. So it happens across the board in all the different types of cancers, and we need to figure out what is contributing to financial toxicity. Okay, what are the major contributors? First of all, when we look in 2020, for example, our US national health expenditure as a share of gross domestic product reached an all-time high of 19.7%. Most economists feel like if you get to 22%, your economy will fail, won't be able to sustain that. And that's up from 17% a couple of years ago. So we're having a pretty astronomically high rate of rise and increase in our GDP due to national health expenditures. That number is about $4.1 trillion. Trillion with a T is what we spend in the United States alone on healthcare. When you look at this graph, this is from 1960 to 2010, you can see this huge rise in national healthcare expenditures to a point of a 818% increase. So rate of rise of 818%. When you look at this equivalent line, which is this bottom one, this is the increase in wages over that same 50-year period. And you can see that wages increase only 16%. So the take-home pay that the average individual is taking home is only increased by 16%, whereas the amount of money our country is spending on health expenditures has risen by 818%. So you can start to see the problem of the discrepancies there and the issues that might cause for patients. When you look at the top 20 classes of medical therapies and the difficulties that they cause in terms of spending, of the top 20 classes, you can see that cancer spending is number one, okay? And not only that, but we're almost double the second, third, and fourth being diabetes, asthma, and autoimmune diseases in terms of spending. This was in 2016, marking us about 83 to $88 billion in cancer spending alone. This has increased since then, of course, but you can see that we, in cancer spending, outspend every other top class of medical costs. When you look at the prevalence of cancer in the United States, cancer, of course, tends to affect the elderly more so than the young. And here we had, this is the line when all of our baby boomers turned 65. But you can also see just a rapid rate of rise of the number of individuals living with cancer in the United States. That has to do with multiple things, more an aging population, but also it has to do with the fact that we are diagnosing cancer a lot better these days, so we have a better understanding of who is living with cancer. We're also having more effective treatments of cancer, so people are living longer than they normally would. And so you're having this higher number of individuals that are on cancer therapies of some sort or having to deal with the high costs of cancer care. When we look at the rising drug costs, it looks out of proportion to inflation. And this is one of the reasons that it's becoming so astronomically expensive to afford cancer care. So if you were to take Gleevec or imatinib, for example, which is a drug that's used for chronic myelogenous leukemia, it can also be used for gastrointestinal stromal tumors. The drug price increased from 158% from 2007 to 2014. But you can see that inflation was only 15%. So if the drug had increased by inflation alone, you would have had the drug go from $118 per unit to $136 per unit. But instead, that drug rose to $306 per unit. So we're talking almost a doubling in the cost of the drug, even though inflation was only 15%. Same thing with a drug called dasatinib, an increase of 133%. Again, the inflation rate was only 15% during those years. The cost should have gone from $87 to $100 if just by inflation alone, and yet we see the cost rising from $200. So it's not just inflation that's causing these drugs to go, their cost to go out of proportion, but there are additional market forces that are working on this to allow these drugs to be priced astronomically higher and higher every year. So we asked ourselves the questions, are the prices higher because the drugs are more effective? When you look at the drugs that came to market from 2002 to 2014, your progression-free survival on average was about 2.5 months, and your overall survival benefit was about 2.1 months. So every drug that came to market increased survivability by about 2 months, whereas our older chemotherapies have increased survivability in terms of 7 months to a year or longer oftentimes. But these new directed therapies were only allowing us an additional 2 months. So you can see the graphs here. This is on average for all the drugs that came out over those years from 2002 to 2014, and it was over 71 different drugs. And you can see the median over survival gains just being about 2.1 months. So we're not necessarily seeing an increase in effectiveness that would then denote an increase in price, but we're just seeing these rising prices regardless. So the high prices are needed for further drug development, right? That's what we're always told. We're told that we can't lower the prices of drugs because we need that for drug development. Well, in 2014, the BBC News actually looked at the top 10 world's largest pharmaceutical firms, and they looked at the total revenue that these firms took in. They divided that up between research and development, that's R&D spend, research and development. So this should be the category that's driving the prices up right here, right? Because it's developing new drugs, research and development. They divided that between that and sales and marketing, and then just what the company took in terms of profit. I highlighted here Pfizer as an example. Pfizer only put $6.6 billion into research and development, while profiting $22 billion in 2014. They spent almost twice as much as research and development on sales and marketing, and they profited almost 3 times as much as research and development. So it is not the research and development that is causing the astronomical prices of these drugs. And if you go down the list, research and development on all of these different Johnson & Johnson, Merck, AstraZeneca, research and development category is never the highest category. It's always either higher in sales and marketing or higher in the amount of profits that the company takes in the year. So I think we need to stop having the conversation that we can't control pricing because of research and development. We need to be looking at alternative measures so that we don't have some of these astronomical profit margins that these companies are taking home in a year. The other issue is insurance company profits. One thing we'll talk about a little bit later is that more and more of the costs for healthcare is being put upon the individual and taken what's called cost sharing from the insurance company. So the insurance company doesn't have to pay for that portion, but the individual does. When you look at their full year profits, so we're going to be looking at the dark bars in these charts. If we look at United Healthcare, they made over $10 billion in 2018, and that increased in 2019 by a substantial amount. If you look at CVS, they made less than $1 billion in 2018, and then now are making over $5 billion in 2019. Every single one of these insurance companies for the full year profits is making significant more in terms of billions of dollars. Cigna, for example, Humana, again, 2018, 2019. So when you look at these, I think that we need to start having discussions about what we're doing to patients in terms of the cost sharing and the burden that patients are having to take on in terms of the cost for their healthcare when they do have and pay for insurance from these companies. So why has cancer become more expensive? I think it's a true thing that patients are on treatments longer and they're getting more effective and better tolerated. So patients, and we're getting more of them out there. So patients have multiple opportunities for different types of therapies. So that drives the cost up. But I also think we need to take a really deep look at why drugs are more expensive than they were a few decades ago, even if they've been there the whole time and have not changed patents, and why insurance companies have shifted more of the cost of treating cancer to the patient in the form of higher copays and deductibles. There is an institute at Duke, Cancer Institute, that is looking at tackling some of these financial toxicity questions. And this is some of the research that we're looking at currently. When we ask Americans what they feel about cancer drugs, 90% of Americans say cancer drugs are too expensive. And most of the new cancer drugs are priced higher than about $100,000 per year. So patients are telling us they're too expensive. And when we look at the average monthly income of an individual, it's around $3,600. If they have a 25% coinsurance of a $10,000 drug, that's $2,500 for that cancer drug a month. So that's 70% of the average American's monthly income. So that's quite a bit of money. And you can see average monthly costs from chemotherapy can be anywhere from $1,000 to $12,000, radiation at $9,000, immunotherapy as high as $12,500. When we look at annual out-of-pocket costs during the cancer battle, about a third of individuals pay anywhere from less than $1,000 to $5,000, whereas 2/3 of individuals are paying anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 out of pocket in a year for cancer care. So it is pretty astronomical. And that's not the only issue, right? There are hidden costs of cancer. So it's not just that people are having to shell out more money out of their pockets, but it's also that, for example, in 2015, cancer costs Americans aged 16 to 84 a total of $94 billion in lost earnings. So it's not just shelling money out of the pocket, but it's also not being able to earn any money back to be able to pay for some of these expenditures because you're undergoing cancer care and you're not able to work for that period of time. So factors that patients have reported that increase the impact financial toll of cancer are things like travel, treatment costs, of course, lost wages, which we just talked about. And this one's, I think, very important and doesn't often get looked at, but home care and caregiving. You also have caregivers that have to stay at home with the individual and care for them. And so they have lost wages, they have lost time. Because of these hardships, we talked about this already a little bit, patients are having issues paying bills. About almost half of patients are having issues paying bills. About 1 in 5 individuals are struggling to buy food. 12% of individuals are avoiding doctor's appointments or follow-up tests. They're lowering the doses of prescriptions, they're skipping recommended treatments, and there's about 1% declaring bankruptcy. And I know 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at the millions of individuals with cancer, 1% of that is quite a lot. If you look at the amount, the average total that patients spend on cancer, it's about $150,000 a year. That compared to the other major ones, stroke, heart attack, diabetes, we're talking about a 4-fold increase in the cost that cancer patients spend to what patients spend for these other issues. So we're definitely one of the major issues driving up costs. So let's talk about management strategies. And when it rains on your parade, look up rather than down, for without the rain, there would be no rainbow, right? So some of the issues are not things that we can fix. So some of them are systems issues. So you want to work to increase transparency and costs of medical care. We need to develop tools to identify individuals who are more susceptible to financial toxicity so that we can help earlier on in the process. We need to use better value alternatives when possible, like generic medications and things. And we need to work with national organizations to affect health policy changes. But what are the things you all can do right now? Well, one of the things that we've heard from cancer patients and cancer survivors is that nearly 66% of cancer patients express interest in talking with their doctors about costs. And only a third of patients talk to their oncologists, and only less than half of oncologists have reported having these discussions. So they need to be part of our conversations when patients come in, so they can let us know so that we can help affect change. So what can you do? Understand your health insurance coverage is the main one. And I know that's a lot of a burden on you, but knowing your premiums, deductibles, co-payments, co-insurances, and making sure that you communicate that to individuals. If you don't understand it, seek financial assistance. Financial coordinators and social workers that we have on our teams can help locate grants, discuss medical leave options, and maybe get through some of the weeds of understanding your health insurance coverage for you. And then finally, discuss financial difficulties with your treatment team. So switching to things like generic drugs, consolidating clinic visits, getting assistance with transportation, all those things can help reduce costs of care. And so if you let your team know, they can make steps to try and help you work through some of those issues. I think that one of the big issues also is the risk of becoming unemployed. It's about 37% higher for cancer survivors in comparison to healthy controls. So also trying to work continuously to get people back into their job, their employment, their work is important. And we are currently looking at new interventions to help cancer survivors return to the workforce, because that can make for healthier mental health, as well as just getting back into having some income to help prevent some of these issues in terms of the cost of cancer care. I want to say a special thank you to anyone who has participated in a clinical trial, whether that be a phase 1, 2, or 3, or whether it be a health services research trial, filling out a survey or those kind of things. It's because of you that we're able to improve the care delivery that we can to all of our patients and to save lives. So thank you. So that is the end of my talk. I appreciate your attention, and I'm now open for questions.